Hello everyone! We're back again to our regular morning talk show. But this time I have invited our special guest speakers who are very experts on their respective fields. So they are here with me to join me as we discuss our topic on the anti-NAFTA agreement. First, I would like to give you a brief introduction of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. So NAFTA was officially implemented last January 1st, 1994, and before it was fully enforced or implemented, it was signed by the former President George Bush last December 17, 1992. So the agreement was established encompassing these three countries, and two of these three countries are the biggest countries in the world, and they are Canada, the US, and of course Mexico. So the purpose and the objectives of this agreement is to promote business investment or investment opportunities, to expand their trade relationship, at the same time expanding the economic growth of each of these countries. And so let's start.
Thank you, Maria. So let's take a look on the impact of unemployment. And first, what is unemployment? Well, we learned from the book, it is the number of persons who are above 15 years old who are actively seeking for a job but unemployed. So actually we need to take a look at this part. If NAFTA impacted this part, and actually according to the research, and it did, and it caused job losses primarily by driving manufacturing jobs to Mexico, and where production costs were lower than Canada. And because of that, and Canadian workers faced wage pressure as companies outsource jobs. This leads to job instability in Canada. And this one also results to small business suffering, and especially in sectors like agriculture, and struggle to compete with cheaper US and Mexico imports. Unemployment, we all know, there are three types. And the first is frictional unemployment, which results when people move from jobs. And the structural unemployment, which results from structural change in economics major industry. And then the last one, cyclical unemployment, it caused by fluctuations in the economic's growth rate. So, Grace, I want to ask you, so what employment type do you think NAFTA caused?
I personally think frictional unemployment.
Smart, but not perfect. And actually, it mainly caused structural unemployment. Because the relocation of manufacturing jobs to Mexico has caused workers face difficulties transition to new jobs, this results in prolonged unemployment. But as Grace said, it also caused frictional unemployment because the transition period for workers, it could be extended due to the changing landscape of available jobs. And for cyclical unemployment, I don't think it is related, since it only happens in recessionary period. And from my perspective, and I think we should anti-NAFTA based on all the negative impacts I have introduced. And actually, the governments also agree with me. That's the reason they changed NAFTA to CUSMA. And let's take a look at CUSMA, what they have done to the unemployment factor. And they introduced higher labor standards, such as discouraging companies from moving jobs to Mexico for cheaper labor. And if we look at this data, we can see during the NAFTA period, and Canada really suffered the most of unemployment, and Mexico was the winner. So I feel like for unemployment, this factor, Mexico was the winner, we are the loser. And we're also aware that NAFTA not only affect unemployment, also other things. So Helma will talk about fiscal policy.
Yes, thanks, Jean. Fiscal policy, what is the meaning for fiscal policy? Refers to the government use of spending and transaction influence to the economy. In Canada's case, the fiscal policy helps to the government manage economic stability by either stimulating the economy during downturn or cooling enough inflation gets too high. In this part, do you think that NAFTA affect fiscal policy? Yes, affect. In the three principal aspects. Okay, the first one is fiscal adjustment to control inflation. NAFTA increased trade between USA and Mexico. For this reason, there are pressuring in domestic price into the Canada. Okay. The second one is reduction in cost for key sectors. There are access to cheaper imports, especially manufacturing, lower production costs, helping control inflation in certain sectors in Canada too. And the third one is increase in demand for Canadian export. High demand for Canadian goods in the USA and Mexican markets rises domestic price in sectors like agriculture, for example. Also, NAFTA generate inflationary pressure about the fiscal policy too, in two aspects. The first one is demand pull inflation, because increased demand from the USA and Mexico. With the second one is agricultural sector impact the demand for Canadian wheat and other crop rows, particularly in USA and Mexico market. Which another one is cost push inflation, lower production costs through cheaper imports. NAFTA enabled Canadian businesses to import cheaper input from USA and Mexico, which reduce production costs, particularly in sectors like manufacturing. The second one is manufacturing sector benefits because there are affordable parts and raw material, for example, allowing them to maintain competitive price for both domestic and international markets. And the last one is domestic price increases. The cost saving from cheaper imports allowing Canadian businesses to stabilize domestic price even as a demand grows, helping to maintain economy stability and control inflationary pressure at home. That's it. The next one is Emmanuel.
I'll be speaking on NAFTA's impact on GDP. So ever since NAFTA came into existence, Canadian exports in the US have tripled. From 1993, Canada's exports to the US, 110.9 billion. And in 2015, the Canadian exports to the US increased to 349.3 billion. That is a dramatic difference. Canada's exports exceeded their imports. And the benefits of this is that Canada is gaining more revenue, more money, than they are losing through imports, right? So due to Canada's growth, there is GDP growth in Canada. More goods and services are being produced, right? And they're being exported and they're getting money. And because of this GDP growth, aggregate demand, the demand for the goods and services produced in Canada are also increasing. So even though NAFTA did have overall a good impact on Canada's GDP, there were some negative impacts. What do you guys think the negative impacts were?
I think I am greatly affected in that one. The monetary policy of Canada has greatly affected.
The downsides of NAFTA is Mexico entering the NAFTA agreement, but only because they surpassed Canada in being US's a top trade partner in the motor industry, right? And because of this, I think you referenced this in your unemployment section. Many of the manufacturing companies in the auto industry, they moved to Mexico, or they shut down. So the second one is the Canadian industries, which had the highest tariff cuts, they faced a decline in output and employment. Originally, well, one of the objectives of NAFTA was to remove tariffs between the three countries, right?
Right.
And because output declined, this puts Canada at risk of
less exports.
Right? Which may lead to their imports exceeding their exports. And if they're losing more money, right?
It's not good to our economy, to the Canadian economy.
Yeah, because they're losing more money than they are gaining. And this is a problem because this could lead to inflation. And when costs increase, businesses in Canada start to shut down, or they may be bought by the U.S. or Mexico. Right. This is one of the potential downsides and negatives of NAFTA on Canadian economy.
Going into international trade. International trade plays a major role in how the three countries import and export their goods. And displayed on the screen is a chart showing some of the imports and exports that Canada has had and some of their trade surpluses and some of their trade deficits. And Emmanuel has mentioned before, the highest is transport equipment, used for automobile cars. They won't send them down to Mexico to be made and they won't send them back up. It's massively decreased. Some of the major cons that NAFTA has been the trade deficits, especially with Mexico as mentioned, and it has caused inflation to significantly increase. There has been a loss in manufacturing jobs because it is less expensive to produce products in other countries, and NAFTA has massively increased the wage gap between the US and Mexico. And a greater economic reliance on the United States is one of the major drawbacks of NAFTA for Canada, due to its heavy reliance on the United States market for exports, and Canada is extremely vulnerable to changes in the economy just south of the border. And because of this dependence, there is a major risk of economic imbalance, and Canadian sectors are frequently exposed to changes in US policy that may not be in line with our Canadian interests. NAFTA has had both positive and negative outcomes, and overall we don't view it as good or bad. It's always going to have pros and cons, but Canada it just depends on how reviewing it. But it has most significantly increased trade for Canada and also has resulted in a major loss of manufacturing jobs here in Canada. And if NAFTA is to continue, then Canada and its trading partners will have to continue to change and evolve with the new realities of global trade. And NAFTA may become non-existent if Trump becomes president, and this will have a major impact on all three countries. NAFTA has strengthened Canada's position as a global trading partner, but again, challenges do remain in maintaining its competitiveness. In conclusion, NAFTA's impact on Canada's international trade has been complex, with both advantages and drawbacks as the trade landscape continues to evolve. Canada must adapt and strategically position itself to maximize the benefits and mitigate the challenges presented by this landmark trade agreement. I'm going to pass it on to Maria.
Thank you for that, Grace. Like what Grace mentioned earlier, NAFTA is not bad at all. There are always pros and cons. For my part, monetary policy, it tremendously affects negatively the monetary policy of the Canadian government. So first, let me define what monetary policy is for everyone. So it consists of the management of the money supply and interest rates by a country's central bank, and is aimed at achieving certain macroeconomic objectives such as controlling inflation, achieving full employment, or stimulating economic growth. So the Bank of Canada has a goal. The Bank of Canada's goal is to be independent on how they approach the monetary policy of the Canadian economy. So with the NAFTA agreement, the Bank of Canada cannot fully implement or has solely independence when it comes to strategies about monetary policy, because Bank of Canada is reliant or dependent on the US economic conditions. So they base their strategy or their approach on what's going on in the US, even if that condition is not applicable to the condition in the domestic economy. Second, the exchange rate sensitivity is also based on the economic US economic changes. So still the same with that one. The Bank of Canada cannot fully implement its role because they depend their decisions on what's going on in the US. And another one is the inflationary pressures. So like what Jermaine mentioned earlier, this agreement causes an inflation to our economy or Canadian economy. And lastly, the reduced export competitiveness due to instability of our Canadian currency. So that's it for my topic.
All right, so we have some recommendations based on consumer and business perspective. And for consumer perspective, and we think we should strengthen customer price monitoring. So we also need to expand workforce development programs. And Hedman, do you have any recommendations for business perspective?
Yes, we have two recommendations for business perspective. The first one is support innovation in key sectors. The second one is promote export diversification, for example, with Asia or Europe, or includes South America too.
Right. So to conclude on some of the recommendations we had, the Canadian government should make data about NAFTA's impact on the Canadian economy and consumers readily available to the public so that we are informed and we know what is going on. They can also, make reports on how NAFTA is affecting consumers, including the price of our goods and services, the quality of products, and our consumer satisfaction. The government can create dedicated online resources with information about NAFTA and its impacts on how consumers can navigate its complexities. And that concludes our time on our talk show. Thank you so much for watching.
so
We will
much.
see you next time.
See ya!
Bye!